I'm Samantha Harkless. I wouldn't say I'm chairing this session. This session, in contrast to the last one where there was a panel and some feisty exchanges, this is an in-conversation, and we want to keep it quite informal. So I'm Samantha Harkless, and I'm conversationing this session, if that's a verb, which it isn't.
It is now.
It is now. I just verbed it. Right, so now, I have a slight problem with this session, which is these two fantastic women, Liz O'Riordan and Tricia Greenhalgh, have written this great book, A Complete Guide to Breast Cancer, How to Feel Empowered and Take Control. And I have to say, even though, thankfully for now, I don't need it, and was reading it really to see what was relevant to this session, I found myself reading all of it, because it's great, it's a terrific read, it's really digestible, it's really friendly, it's full of information. So I cannot recommend it highly enough, basically. But that's not strictly what this session is about, because this session is a bit broader in its remit. This session is entitled Disease, Lifestyle Choices and Risk, Untangling Myth from Reality. So the first thing I'm going to say is, this is not going to be a session all about breast cancer, although obviously it's highly relevant, because that's, if you like, the case around which a lot of this wonderful writing and your more general work is centred. So don't be upset if you thought we were going to just talk about the book for an hour and a quarter. I'm afraid we're not, although we will use that as a starting point. And certainly don't let that put you off buying it, because I know they're going to go off and sign books in the bookshop immediately afterwards, so do go and buy it and get it signed. But what we're going to talk about is the slightly broader issues that come out of it, about how we relate to our own health, and also how, if you like, official bodies, the health service, public health bodies and so on, relate to health, and how we tackle this tricky problem, which slightly arose in the last session, about dealing with what we can know and quantify about risk and risk factors, and what can we change about our lifestyle to change our own risk, and what, in fact, should be changed? Should that be our priority? So it's those questions that we're going to look at. And the only other thing I'm going to say is I will, after I've monopolised them for a bit, because that's my prerogative, I will obviously open up the conversation to all of you, and it will be a conversation between all of us. But I am just going to say this now, so you can settle it in your mind. This is not a consultation. These two people are highly qualified doctors, but if you want medical advice, this is not the time or the place or the person. You should go and talk to your GP. So if anyone starts saying, look, I've got this so-and-so and so-and-so, I'm going to give you about 5 seconds to relate it directly to a broader point of interest to everybody, and if not, I'm going to shut you up with these yellow and red cards, which I'm not going to use on you because it's a conversation. But if anyone starts banging on about something I consider irrelevant, you're going to get a yellow card and then a red card. All right, I'm just saying it now. I want to encourage you to join in. I want to encourage your opinions and your reflections, as well as questions that you have. But this is not a medical consultation room. So there you go. Got that out of the way. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to give you a slightly formal introduction, and then I'm just going to start asking you questions about what you think. Yep. So, Tricia Greenhalgh, Professor of Primary Care Health Sciences. Would you prefer me to call you Professor Greenhalgh?
No.
Okay. So, Professor of Primary Care Health Sciences, I beg your pardon, at the University of Oxford, co-author of this excellent book, obviously. But Tricia's also a general practitioner, so a general practitioner and an academic, who trained at Cambridge and Oxford universities and worked at University College London, Queen Mary University of London, before returning to Oxford in 2015, and leads a programme of research at the interface between the social sciences and medicine, so bringing in the humanistic side of medicine as well as the scientific side, which of course is something we'd definitely like to explore. The author of 350 peer-reviewed publications, 12 textbooks, and awarded the OBE, Services to Medicine, in 2001, and made a Fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences in 2014. I think that's right. I think we deserve an
Is that Wikipedia? You see your Wikipedia page? Well, I haven't seen my Wikipedia page. Yeah, it's true. It's just a bit cheesy.
There you go. Well, that's what you get when you don't fill in your speaker form with a biography, I'm afraid.
It's true.
We find your OBE and make it public. Right next to me here, we have Dr. Liz O'Riordan. Consultant breast surgeon at the East Suffolk and North Essex NHS Foundation Trust, and co-author of this excellent book, obviously. Qualified from the University of Wales College of Medicine in 1998. Trained in South Wales and East Anglia. Completed a National Oncoplastic Fellowship at the Royal Marsden before being appointed as a consultant in Ipswich Hospital in 2013. Her TEDx talk, The Jar of Joy, talks about how to help anyone diagnosed with cancer. In 2016, she was nominated for a Woman of the Year Award and a Health Education England Patient Leadership Award. Now, of course, the other thing that they have in common is that they have both gone through diagnosis and treatment for breast cancer, and that's what's made them uniquely qualified to write this book from the point of view of both doctor and patient. And I gather that was a bigger turnaround perhaps than you'd expected. So although I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about, if you like, the substance of the book, I would like to just start off maybe hearing briefly from you about what was the difference, because obviously you're both highly experienced qualified doctors, very familiar with dealing with disease from the medical point of view, but also from the human point of view. I mean, it's from having a person in front of you, discussing disease, risks, treatment, and so on, and going through that. How different was it to be a patient?
It is totally different. I mean, I think being doctors helped hugely because, you know, we could look stuff up and work out what it meant and all that kind of thing. But it helps once you've got over the initial shock. But that first day, when you get told you've got breast cancer, I mean, as I said, I did a TV interview recently, and I just went home and put breast cancer into Google. Well, isn't that a pretty stupid thing to do? Because you get all sorts of rubbish. And you think, hang on a minute, I know about breast cancer, I was taught it, I manage patients with it, I've done research, you know, into sort of cancer-related things. But when it's you that's got it, it's hard to be rational. And I think that the kind of stigma and the fear around the diagnosis of cancer is, it throws you. And even though my oncologist said right at the beginning, she said, your prognosis is excellent, that didn't really mean anything to me. So it was like, cancer? That's the only thing that hit on day one. So yeah, it was pretty horrible.
I was in shock because how can a breast surgeon get breast cancer? And I found out when I saw my ultrasound scan. Normally patients are drip-fed information, but I knew the minute I saw my scan, and I knew within seconds I needed chemotherapy, I needed a mastectomy, I knew what my risk of being alive in 10 years was. And there was that sense of denial, it can't happen to me, because I've looked after patients who've died of breast cancer. And suddenly, when I was telling my husband and my family, I was talking about another patient, not me, because it couldn't be real. And I realised, despite the fact I spent my life training to look after patients with breast cancer, I knew nothing about what it's like to be a patient. And there's so much doctors and nurses don't know. But why would we? We've never had cancer. And that's kind of why we wrote the book, to try and share and train health professionals as well as patients.
So has that changed now? You're both practicing as doctors, aren't you? Has that changed the way you work as doctors, having been on that side of it?
So I think there's two things. I'd like to think I was a good doctor beforehand, but I'm more aware of language. Because I see the entire spectrum of breast cancer, I may tell someone, you know, you're lucky we caught it early. But I now know no one is lucky to get cancer. And I know when I say cancer, you just want to run out of the room screaming, la 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 la, but I have to give all this information, and it's learning how to do that. But it's also, I want to be their friend. I want to tell them, chemo isn't that bad, and actually I can't, because I still have to be the bad guy, and for me it's learning ethically how to be a doctor and a patient, and look after them properly.
Well, I have not gone back to general practice after breast cancer, so I work full-time as an academic, and certainly it's changed the way I do my research into health and illness. But because I was what they call immunosuppressed for about 18 months throughout my treatment. It took a very long time for me to recover from the hit that chemotherapy gave me, or, or for my blood to recover. They told me I was time expired and I'd have to do some retraining to go back to general practice, which is crazy really, because I'm perfectly able to go back, but because I'm most of my time in any case as an academic. But yes, it has changed my academic work. I've always been quite interested in the patient experience, but that was quite easy to reify. It was an interest in humanities, an interest in narrative, an interest in what might be called the confessional genre in literature. It's really, really common for people to write about their illness. And I've long done that kind of research. I guess now I understand where the patient is coming from a bit more. I mean, for example, with diabetes, which is what I trained in initially, 99% of your time as a person living with diabetes, you're on your own. 1% you're interacting with health professionals. And same with cancer, really. Same with any condition. I kind of get now what that other 99% is about, much more than I used to. And I realise that there's a whole body of knowledge about that 99% of your time when you're not actually in there having a blood test or a scan or being examined or reporting back to the doctor. There's a whole shed load of other stuff, which is what we put in the book. I mean, we've got a section there, for example, how do you tell people, who do you tell that you've got cancer, for example? It's just something I'd never thought about until I had to go through it myself.
No, I was very struck by how much this is about the lived process. I mean, there's quite hardcore medical information in there, but a lot of it is about, well, here you are, you're in this situation, and the kind of questions that you'd be asking. It's a very human book, which is great.
Yeah, can I come back on that? Because you're right. The lived experience, the humanness of it, I think it's a unique selling point, if you like, but although we're not actually here to sell the book, I'm just trying to use it as a way of getting around this, but that is absolutely linked to the evidence base. So I've been working in evidence-based medicine for 25 years, and there is an evidence base on everything that we put in the book. So, for example, if you get breast cancer when you've got young children, which neither of us had, at the time, but if you did, there's actually an evidence base on how to break the news to your young children that you've got, for example, advanced breast cancer. So it's not as if there's this thing called the patient experience, which is an evidence-free zone, and then there's the things that doctors do, where all the science is. There is a social science and research evidence around every aspect of the lived experience of illness. And it's bringing those two together that's what we wanted to do.
Well, that's great, because one of the things that I wanted to look at was the kind of the evidence-based stuff that you look at in the book. And I was very impressed by the way you take a very reasoned and you see the very level playing field in the book between alternative cancer treatments and more conventional health advice. And in all of it, you seem to apply the same kind of standards of, well, what's the evidence for this? What else might you base your decision on? What are the potential costs and benefits? So let's unpack that a bit, because the idea that things in your life are going to give you cancer is a completely widespread one. I mean,
Bacon being the latest.
Bacon, absolutely, yes. Only last week I was complaining about the Advertising Standards Authority, which banned an advert for favourably comparing bacon butties with avocado. And apparently there's this new ruling that says the Advertising Standards Authority are not allowed to unfavourably compare fruit and vegetables with other things. So fruit and vegetables have this kind of iconic status now. You may well have astonished, madam. I was like, what is this a thing now? Anyway, so Costa Coffee got into trouble for unfavourably comparing avocados with bacon butties as a breakfast food. And so I wrote a little piece. I was tweeting first. I wrote a piece of City AM going, for heaven's sake, just how risky is bacon? And there's always figures, obviously. Yeah. So come on, you're the experts. If I have a bacon butty every day as opposed to an avocado, how much is my risk of breast cancer going up? Hey?
So we wrote a piece in the Independent to come
Yeah,
back.
they can tell you pretty accurately.
They say if you eat a lot of processed meat, your risk may go up by 9% from the studies. But the problem is...
Hang on, is that 9% of...
your own risk. So this is where... And the problem is these studies were mainly observational. So you can't control how much bacon someone says they ate over 10 years. And what people extrapolate is 9% increase means an extra 9 in 100 women will get breast cancer. But it's wrong.
Not what it is.
It's your individual risk. So when you're 20, your risk of getting breast cancer is 1 in 2,000. So a 9% increase of 1 in 2,000 is still tiny.
When about 1.1 in 2,000.
When you're 70, your risk is about 1 in...
1 in 8?
About 1 in 8 women. So a 9% increase may be an extra 1 in 170-year-olds. It's very, very small. But the press like to say, eating bacon will double your risk. Well, that means every other person is going to get it. It's not true. And it's how you teach people to explain and understand the science and how it's quoted so they can make decisions themselves.
So I mean, that's a very specific thing. And as a bit of a stats nerd, I am always the one going, 9% of what? 9% of what? Is this relative risk or absolute?
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Is this a 9% risk, as in 100 of us in this room and suddenly 9 of us are going to get cancer? Or is it, as you say, my risk was already 10% and now it's 11% because it's gone up
and actually,
9% of that?
It may just be obesity. We know being overweight does increase your risk, and if more people eat bacon or overweight, then that's probably the biggest factor rather than, I like bacon, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Trish is a vegetarian.
Yeah. I mean, we if you talk about risk factors, we neither of us had any risk factors. And in fact, if you use those risk calculators, we were thin, we were fit, I mean, I'm vegetarian, but you're a great kind of heavy meat eater either.
No family history.
I'd had my first pregnancy at 29. Just about every risk factor I ticked off saying, I'm all right, so I'm not going to get breast cancer. But actually, the risk factors increase your risk a little bit, but the overwhelming things that predict that you're going to get breast cancer are how old you are and being female. And if you're a woman in her mid-50s, as I was 3.5 years ago, then your risk is pretty high, even if all your risk factors are low, if you see what I mean.
Well, this throws up the question for me then, what is the value of knowing these risk cancers and having these studies that say bacon increases your risk by this, or even the big ones? I mean, the ones you cite in the book, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you say the only two that are really significant in increasing your risk are obesity and heavy drinking. Is that right?
And the only modifiable ones, yes.
And that's because most female breast cancers are sensitive to the hormone estrogen. And after the menopause, when your ovaries stop, you make it in the fat that you have. And the more fat you have, the more estrogen you make. Therefore, potentially, your breast cells are being stimulated.
So what about premenopausal women?
Being overweight is still a risk factor. Binge drinking is more for postmenopausal women. But you get people like us who still get breast cancer.
And my breast cancer was estrogen negative. So all the risk factors are oriented around how much estrogen you've got circulating. But 15% of breast cancers are estrogen receptor negative. So in other words, they're caused by a completely different set of factors.
So the estrogen makes no difference?
No. Makes no difference whatsoever.
And I think a lot of research is being put into how can we prevent breast cancer? How can we prevent cancer? Let's do all these studies to look. You can't prevent breast cancer because men get it and women get it, and you can't stop being older. And if all that research was put into treating metastatic cancer and actually treating it, I think that's where the problem comes. They're trying to find a way to prevent it.
Well, this is a very radical stance. In fact, in the last session, we had some of the audience basically saying, look, if we just find enough prediction using genetics, then we should be able to prevent everything. And you're saying pretty much the opposite, that actually looking at prevention is largely a waste of time and money, and we should focus on treatment.
For breast cancer.
Genomics
may be a way of the future, and I think actually there's a lot we don't know about the melanoma subtype of breast cancer, but looking at diet and factors like that are great in the press but don't make any sense is a waste of money.
So coffee, does it kill cancer or cure cancer?
Who knows?
Very interestingly, the coffee stuff, someone wrote a paper recently mapping out all the different studies on coffee with each different disease. And I can't remember who it was or where it was published, but there'd be some study showing that coffee causes Crohn's disease and another one showing it cures it and all that kind of thing. But the plain fact is the influence of these dietary factors are usually tiny, and you have to do massive studies to reach statistical significance. But let's go back a bit. Let's go back to where did all this come from? X causes cancer. I think the one that we ought to kind of use as the anchor is Richard Doll's study of smoking and lung cancer. Now, when was it? It started in the 50s, I think, and he wrote to 40,000 British doctors saying, look, chaps, male British doctors, don't worry about the women, because they kind of, you want to scientifically clean samples, and let's leave out women and, anybody with brown face and all that kind of thing. Anyway, they had 40,000 male British doctors, and they wrote to all of them, they said, would you please, every 10 years answer a questionnaire, and could we please track what you died of when you die? And they followed them up for 50 years. And after 10 years, they had demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt the ones who smoked were, I think, 7 or 8 times as likely to get lung cancer as the ones who didn't smoke. It was a phenomenal thing. I mean, almost nothing else causes lung cancer, you know what I mean? Now, when you think that's where we started, but smoking and lung cancer are so closely linked that you could probably have shown it with just 100 in the sample.
Well, I think originally they did a... Look, this is my turn to... I'm in danger of getting too nerdy and technical.
No, get nerdy.
If I use any terms that normal people don't understand, this is where you put your hand up and go, oi, Harkness, quit the jargon. So they did a case control study in a London hospital where they got patients who were in with lung cancer, patients who were in with something else, and they counted equal numbers of them as it happened, and they counted how many of them were smokers in each case, and then they cut it the other way. So they basically went, actually it turns out that nearly all of the people with lung cancer smoked, whereas the others were a much more normal kind of mix. And so that was the first one. And I think again the kind of the relationship they found there was that from that sample, being a smoker made you 8 or 12 times as likely to get lung cancer. So even without knowing any causes or anything like that, it was like, but the odds don't look good.
No, the odds don't look good. And then but they did lots of other really clever things, like they demonstrated that the more you smoke, the more likely you are to get lung cancer. And they also controlled for what we call confounding variables, and that's absolutely key. And this is slightly nerdy, but for example, if you correlate the number of churches in a town with the number of pubs, very high correlation, but does that mean that it's the Christians who are doing the drinking? That kind of thing. No,
actually, it's from the people here, I think it probably is.
But the idea that two things can be correlated, but they're not, but it's not causal. Now, diet is, go back to Levi-Strauss. He said, tell me what you eat, and I'll tell you who you are. In other words, what we eat is symbolic of all sorts of cultural and social things about us. I've just been in Yorkshire for a week, and they're all sitting in the pub eating pork pies and that kind of thing. It's because I'm from Yorkshire. Now, very often...
Pork pies are born in Leicester.
Oh, yeah, okay, right. Sorry. But the idea that someone who drinks coffee, for example, is more likely to get a certain illness, that person who drinks coffee will also have other lifestyle habits and practices that may not be measured, and that's what's known as a left-out variable bias, or but anyway, even if it is causal, going back to bacon and breast cancer, the incremental amount is tiny. If you eat a vast amount of bacon compared to people who never eat a tiny bit, it's 9% increase in your existing risk. It's certainly no more than that. With smoking, it's hang on a minute, 8 times, let's say 10 times, what's that? I mean, that's 1,000% increase. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, but the trouble was, because the Doll and Pito study of smoking and lung cancer in British doctors was so overwhelmingly demonstrable, we've now got a generation of epidemiologists who can't think of any other way to study it. And that is the problem, is that, you know, as an academic, you know, someone comes on and says, oh, I think I'll do a PhD with this epidemiologist. Say, well, go and count how many, you know, whatever it is, how many avocados this person eats for breakfast, and then see what happens to them 40 years later.
It will happen. It will be written up somewhere.
Oh, it'll be written up somewhere. But the plain fact is that's probably not what we should be doing, because I think, never mind the kind of fine detail, I think we can demonstrate that apart from smoking, alcohol and being overweight, and actually perhaps the amount of physical activity you do, the rest is detail. That's not where we should be focusing.
And the biggest killer of most people with cancer is heart disease, which is what most people die of, which is also attributable to being overweight, drinking and exercise.
So is that what it is? It's just that people who are
30%
generally unhealthy get heart disease.
30% of patients with breast cancer will die of metastatic disease. The other 70% will die of natural causes. And what do most people in the UK die of? Heart attacks, strokes. And that's probably, again, unhealthy lifestyles. We don't help with making the menopausal and putting on weight, but it's, if we as doctors aren't telling people to eat healthy, the 80-20 rule, exercise, we're not helping them.
And I think one of the things that we experienced as going through breast cancer treatment, I mean, you can see we're pretty thin. But there
I can
was...
also, having walked upstairs with them, confirm they're both annoyingly fit.
What happens when you go through treatment is that you get a blur of your body image, because people keep kind of cutting bits of your way and doing all the things. You lose your hair, you know, you've got these scars all over you. You have to kind of make sure the husband's already in bed looking the other way before you come out the bathroom, all that kind of thing. Actually, that's not terribly good for body image. Then you've got the effects of the chemotherapy. It kind of makes you a bit, you have to keep grazing, a bit like you do when you're pregnant. I mean, I have dreadful morning sickness, you know, I nibble biscuits all the time. It's a bit like that when you're on chemo. And so on average, a woman going through breast cancer treatment will put on about 3 kilos?
Sometimes like 5 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, and people, it's very, very hard not to put on that weight. But just as after you've had your baby, it's very hard to lose it afterwards. So you end up, having come through your breast cancer treatment, you know, your hair's coming back a different colour and not the way you wanted it, your eyelashes have gone, I've still got no eyelashes.
You've lost a boob, you don't like yourself.
You don't like yourself. And
we come along and say, exercise, lose weight.
Otherwise you're going to get diabetes.
I've had cancer, leave me alone.
Yeah. And actually, that getting back in what in the book we call the new normal, to say, no, actually, I'm probably more likely to die of heart disease. I'm more likely to get diabetes than I am to get another breast cancer. That kind of thing. You've got to think about your whole health. And the most important thing is live a healthy lifestyle. And that's when we start banging on about the fruit and veg and, you know, junk food. We're not big on junk food in there, you know.
But again, I mean, what's the evidence around things like junk food? Because I was very impressed by the way that you kind of apply the same standards to, if you like, standard health advice as you do to alternative medicine. So you go through the cancer-preventing, curing diets and very sensibly say, well, look, actually, this one is not a bad general diet, and you would probably lose weight, which, as you say, is probably long-term good thing. This one isn't great, you can do it for a little while. This one's probably a really bad idea. But you address it in a very sensible way, looking, as you said before, at the evidence base. But then you do a similar thing with, if you like, the conventional health advice about lose weight, get some exercise, and so on and so forth, focusing on the stuff for which there is evidence, and you're actually quite dismissive of things which, you know, to be honest, I hear a lot of public health messages about diet before eating processed meat, things like that, and you're like, listen, there's no individual food that's going to give you cancer or prevent it, and don't get too hung up on it.
So I think you've had cancer. Enjoy yourself. If you want a glass of bubbly, if you want a bacon sandwich, that's fine. I kind of think the 80-20 rule, it's impossible to live a clean, healthy diet. It can be boring, and actually sometimes you just want to eat crap food because you've had cancer, you're having a bad day.
Sorry, what's the 80-20?
Eat well 80% of the time and 20% of the time have a treat. That kind of, you know, if you fancy a chocolate bar, have a chocolate bar, just don't want to have 1 or 3 a day. But coming back to the diets, there's so much around turmeric and kale juicing, and there is never going to be a trial that compares chemotherapy with kale juicing. You're never going to get people to sign up to that, and enough to get a 10-year follow-up to say kale juicing is far better than chemotherapy.
Because it isn't.
Got it? But I'm trying to go on the skeptic side, you know. I can't technically say kale juicing doesn't work because there isn't the evidence to show that. And having had a local recurrence, if my cancer came back again, my mum may say, I can't cure someone with metastatic cancer. But you read that one report to this guy in Germany with this clinic, you give me £500,000 and I'll give you a vitamin C enema and cure you. My mum may say, will you try that because I don't want you to die? And having not been in that position, we can't comment. We just want to help people just to realise.
I think there's also, with these, really, I think there's some scandalous fad diets out there by people who are trying to make money out of people who've got cancer. And that's where a lot of these are coming from, particularly the ridiculous ones where you're supposed to cut out 90% of normal foods and start, you know, eating, you know,
goat curd
and nuts. I don't know, you know, it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah,
Only
you know,
things that
but
cavemen would
also,
have eaten, except we don't really know.
but also the sort of abusive things like sticking things up your backside. Look, if you want to have food, put it in your mouth. Right, that kind of thing.
There's official advice from a doctor.
But having said that, the reason why, and actually that food chapter went back and forth between us because I think I did the first draft and Liz sent it back saying, no, you're being too prescriptive here because, and we know this, when you've been diagnosed with cancer, you want to be in control and you want to do something that helps. And actually, controlling what goes into your mouth is one way that you can feel in control. And that's why so many people, when they get the diagnosis of cancer, they go, I'm going to go macrobiotic, I'm going to do the so-and-so diet. And then
I lasted a week.
They feel, yeah, exactly. And in fact, the reason why we pedalled back from this diet is rubbish, that diet is rubbish, we didn't say that. We said, look, if you want to follow it, that's fine, but there is no evidence it's going to do you any good.
But if it makes you feel healthy, then...
If it makes you feel healthy to go vegetarian or, you know, whatever it might be, then I understand why you might want to do that. And we really do understand it, you know. But the other thing is, when you're in the middle of treatment, there's what is palatable, what can you actually take? Because you lose your sense of taste for 6 months.
If you're having chemo.
If you're having chemo, yeah, that's true. And I mean, the only thing I could eat was cheese on toast. Because at least it was warm. But everything else tasted like cardboard. So forget about this macrobiotic, this, that and the other. I'm sorry, but I'm having cheese on toast every meal, every day for 3 months. Simple as that.
You've got a little
Didn't do me any
checklist
harm.
there.
Yeah.
Do you want to read
The crap checklist.
Perhaps an acronym.
This is reproduced with permission from the gentleman who developed it, who's a cancer doctor in America. The crap, CRAP, are the claims, C for claims, are they too good to be true? Everybody who had this diet got better. I mean, it's not science, is it? R, requests for money, are they selling something? Thirdly, A for anecdotes. Is there... anecdotes. Are there kind of happy stories from people who say they were cured? And P, publisher, are the author's medical credentials hidden and difficult to verify? You know, who is this doctor so-and-so that's supposed to be so good at this? Why can't I find them on the medical register? That kind of thing. So the crap test, very, very important.
So you should remember that. Now, I'm aware that I do want to come out and give you a say, but I wanted to ask one more kind of broader question, which is already arisen from some of the stuff you've been saying. It seems that you have managed quite well in this, and presumably this comes out with you being professional doctors and now having experienced the other side. To find a way to combine both the kind of the evidence base, the research, we have tested this on this many patients and there is a statistically significant benefit from this, but also, as you said, the human experience, that sense of, no, I know it's not healthy, but for heaven's sake, with everything else I'm going through, I'm not going to deny myself this nice thing. And other things you hinted at about the emotions that you go through and the sense of loss of control and wanting to feel good about yourself and in relation to other people, that there seems to be a much broader context to these kind of lifestyle decisions that we make. And even out with the acute situation of going through treatment for cancer, but every day, I mean, I would like to be healthier and so on, and so there's lifestyle things like, oh, I should always take more exercise and so on, but then there's other things in life, and life gets in the way, and I have that battle between, well, it's not that I don't want to be physically healthy, but it's only one factor in the whole of my life. Now, as doctors, is that the kind of thing that just drives you nuts, or can you see that as a human being, I'm not going to arrange my whole life around what will make my GP happy?
So I think I'm very good at procrastinating and not doing what I tell patients. And for me, I'm a busy woman, I'm a wife, I work, there's so many things going on in my life. I put myself at the bottom of the pile. And I kind of learned after cancer, I'm lucky to have 2 arms and 2 legs that work, and my body has got me through cancer, and hopefully it'll get me through my recurrence and get me through again. And I should put myself first and eat healthily and exercise every day. And then you get a bad spell, and I'm a month on the sofa doing nothing, eating cake, and nobody's perfect. But I think I've come to realise no one's going to put me first if I don't, and I have to look after myself and make myself a priority. And it's worth looking after me if I want to be as strong and as healthy for as long as I can. But you can't think like that all the time, and we've all got so busy lives. It's really hard to tell your husband, oh, I'm just going out for a run. Can you feed the dog and do the dinner and the washing and the ironing? And it's how you fit your health into your lifestyle and what's a priority for you. It is hard.
Let me ask you one question. Do you smoke?
No, I tried, but I just look stupid when I do it. So.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm glad you look stupid when you smoke, because if you smoked, I would put a lot of pressure on you. When I did see patients in general practice, I'd be pretty, lenient with them. I mean, it's not the doctor's job really to take a moral approach, nanny state and all the rest of it, but I felt it was my professional duty to try and talk people out of the habit that would probably kill them if they didn't give it up. Because the link between smoking and cancer, smoking and heart disease, smoking and, half a dozen other diseases is so strong, it's so awful. Apart from that, my patients, could do what they wanted, really.
Okay, so on that note, I imagine there's probably at least one smoker in the audience. Let's see what you think. We have about over half an hour left, so I'm going to let you chip in. I think we're quite a relaxed crowd, so if you're happy, I'm going to take one at a time, and then if we seem like we've got too many, we might have to take them in chunks. But let's start with Anna. So that hand first, and then after that we'll go back to you. So do you want to wait for the microphone?
Thank you. I'm very surprised at what you've said about food and diet, and I'm making the assumption that the research that you're basing your evidence on is not funded by the food industry. I'll assume that. And then I'm wondering, well, is it just for breast cancer that the sort of diet you have is not so significant? Because we've heard so much about the importance of healthy diet in prevention of cancer, and you seem to be sort of debunking that. So I'm very interested to know if it's something specific to do with breast cancer or if it's cancers generally. And then I'm also interested in how the evidence was collected linking the heavy drinking and how heavy drinking was defined.
Okay, lots of technical questions there.
Yeah, sure, okay. First of all, it's a really great question, and thank you. Neither of us is funded by the food industry. Quite a bit of research into epidemiological research into the effects of food on illness is funded by the food industry, and that has to be taken into account very sceptically, and it's great that you pointed it out. The last one I saw actually was a research study of the effects of prunes on bowel movements, and it was funded by the National Association for Prunes or something. It was a really good randomised controlled trial, and prunes really do improve your bowel movements, and so
you took them during chemo, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm no figs actually, but the point about it is just because the food industry funds something doesn't necessarily mean we need to chuck it out. But you're absolutely right. We need to be very, very sceptical. You're right that there is a lot around healthy diets, and I think one of the reasons for that is that our diet is really, really important. Obesity is a huge problem now. 1 child in 25 apparently is now not just obese, but badly obese. In other words, 1 kid in every class is already having problems at a very young age. And that overweight is going to hugely predispose that youngster to diabetes, heart disease, perhaps some cancers. But in addition, if that youngster is a female, if you're overweight when you're pregnant, you're more likely to get gestational diabetes, and that will then affect the environment in which the fetus is growing, and that fetus will be born with a higher risk of developing diabetes. So the intergenerational effects of being overweight are massive. So bottom line is, not being overweight or obese is really, really important for your general health, and the best way to not become overweight or obese is to watch your diet. So, hidden calories, junk food, etc., contribute hugely to obesity. But that is a very different argument from saying turmeric will prevent your cancer or coffee will cause your cancer. So I think healthy diet is critically important for the health of the nation. Specific foods very rarely hugely increase or decrease your risk of cancer. Does that answer?
Bowel cancer, it can. I think red meat and lack of fibre can increase your risk of breast cancer, but that doesn't mean...
bowel cancer.
Yeah, bowel cancer, sorry, but that doesn't mean if you don't eat fibre, it's your fault you've got bowel cancer because you didn't eat fibre, and I think that's the thing. It's making people feel guilty, that because I had a bacon sandwich when I was 20, it's my fault. Ideally, we'd all freshly cook meals every day, but unrealistic. We live in a world where people are busy. We're going to eat processed food and fast food every once in a while, and that's fine. It's just not every day for every meal. When it comes to alcohol, there's been an awful lot of studies done, especially up in Glasgow and Scotland, that have a different population, and it's binge drinking. It's drinking more than the recommended limit, because alcohol is only turned to fat. And again, after the menopause, you make estrogen in your fat, and that's where it comes from. I have a glass of wine every now and again if I want, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's drinking more than you should, and again, that also adds to go back into the heart disease and diabetes. At the end of what you fancy does you good, it makes you feel good. It's just being sensible.
So, of course, remember that very small regular intake of alcohol protects you against heart disease, which is what you're telling us was going to
Just what they say, there's the French paradox, isn't it? Because they kind of, they have it breakfast, lunch and dinner, but not very much. Yeah, the French paradox, that they drink a lot more than we do, but somehow they don't seem to get the ill effects of alcohol. And it's because it's drunk with food, and binge drinking is much less common in France.
Is it that? Maybe the Gauloirs counteracted.
Yeah, maybe. We're back to smoking again.
Who knows what the founding...
There's another bit of this question, which was, what is a safe alcohol limit?
Oh, yes, and what were the studies? What did they define as high levels?
I think it's drinking more than the recommended guidelines a week for women, which is probably over 14, 15 units a week.
And the interesting thing is, what is a unit of alcohol?
Yeah, because the glass of wine we pour ourselves at night is often equivalent to what 3 units you don't realise.
Wine glasses, you buy a pair of wine glasses now, you've got half a bottle in it.
I would say a glass of wine 3 or 4 times a week is fine, but if you're doing that regularly, it's going to be quite a lot. But often it's more of the binge drinking. But then your biggest risk of getting cancer probably got nothing to do with alcohol. And I don't want anyone to feel guilty that because they had 2 glasses of wine a night, that's why they got cancer. It's just sensible moderation.
This is one of the great think one of the great underlying questions is, well, even knowing the risks and having an accurate idea of their effect on population, what should we do about that as individuals, given that, apart from smoking and being so massive you have to remove a forklift truck and those kind of extreme situations, given that the effect is marginal and we have all sorts of other things going on, are we in fact, so I am going to come to you, are we too obsessed with trying to identify risks of things that haven't happened to us yet and avoid them? Are we losing some of our quality of life now because we spend all our time going, oh, that bacon sandwich, that's another 9%, that second glass of wine, that's another 40%.
I'd say yes.
There's also an interesting, I mean, it must be 30 years now since Ulrich Beck wrote his book, The Risk Society. It's not just our medical risks, there's all sorts of other risks, but one of the things he was saying was that you can divide society into the people who can control their risks and the people who actually have very little control over their risks in all sorts of aspects of life. And guess what? That is very socially patterned. You know, I mean, here we are, 3 middle-class women who've got, you know, professional jobs, all that kind of thing. Actually, if you look at the margins of society, the socially excluded, they have much, much less choice. If you're homeless, for example, you get whatever food gets passed to you in the food bank, you know, that kind of thing. So I think it is a bit precious to start thinking about, well, you know, really, should I really do a Nigella and have an avocado on my toast every morning? That's probably not going to make that much difference.
Whereas I'd say you're a worrier or you're not.
Yeah,
you're either going to worry or you're not. And when I was diagnosed, I struggled with statistics. So I have a 60% chance of being around in 10 years, and that's dropped. Now I had a recurrence, and you can think, oh my goodness. But actually, it's 50-50. You get cancer or you don't. You die of cancer or you don't. And you can worry about the numbers, but actually, it's are you happy with what you're doing and happy to take the consequences?
Yeah, that's true.
And I want people to enjoy their life and not worry, but I'm worrying.
Okay, so Professor Campbell, you've been waiting very patiently.
I just wanted to, and I'm sure you would be in agreement, but Liz, you said in particular we should focus on treatments for metastatic cancer, not trying to prevent or threaten.
Here we go.
But I just wanted to check you would be in agreement that whilst spending one's entire life trying to modify one's modifiable risk factors is not necessarily a good use of one's time, but national screening programs for early detection are good for breast, colorectal and cervical cancer. They allow us to pick up cancers early, so ideally they are treatable by surgery and then reduce your likelihood of metastasis.
I think screening programs are fantastic because we've both been through chemo for advanced disease, and I don't want anyone to have to go through it, and I think screening is great. Again, in this horrible pink fluffy month of October, you realise so little research. I think partly breast cancer gets too much money because it's easy to put a sexy woman in a bra on the cover of a magazine. Where do we hear about anal cancer and cervical cancer and tongue cancer? And so little research goes to metastatic because that's what people are dying of. Screening is important, and it's funny, so many of my friends have said, I don't want to go for a mammogram because I don't want to know. And that's a decision you have to make yourself. We're all for screening, aren't we?
It's an interesting one. There's been some fascinating scientific debate, particularly around mammography screening. There's a chap called Peter Goetsch who's written a book, and he's absolutely passionate that mammography screening isn't effective. And then there's also people who are saying, well, actually, Goetsch is wrong about that, and it's, you know, they argue about the interpretation. But basically, what this argument is centred on is, does this screening program simply increase what we call the lead time? Does it pick people up early? Then you can say if you're picked up in a screening program, you know, you'll live 20 years, whereas if you're picked up not in a screening program, you'll only live 10 years. But maybe that's because the screening program picked you up 10 years earlier than, you know, in other words, you would have lived the same amount. Now, it's complex, but my interpretation of the evidence is that the National Breast Screening Programme in this country has saved a huge number of lives, even though it didn't do anything direct for me. So 6 months before I found I didn't find a lump actually. I found some bleeding from a nipple, which as a doctor I knew was problematic, and I went straight away the same day and got it looked at. But 6 months prior to that, I'd had my screening mammogram, which was reported as normal. Now they did another mammogram after I got my symptoms, and that was also normal, which is kind of weird because I had cancer. So how come if you had cancer, why was all these mammograms normal? What they did was they said, let's go back and look at your mammogram from 6 months ago, which I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone for my screening. And they compared the two, and they said, well, if we look at each of those, they're both normal, but they're not the same. Something new has happened, and there's these little flecks of calcium. We think you need a biopsy. So even though, in a way, you could say that the National Screening Programme missed my cancer, actually it was more complex than that. That apart from anything else, going for a mammogram raises your awareness that, hang on a minute, you must be in a risk group if you're being pulled in. And so long as you know that after your negative mammogram, if you get any kind of breast symptom, pop along to your GP and get it looked at.
Is there a danger that somebody with less savvy than you would go, oh, well, I've had a mammogram, it was clear, so I'll be fine.
And that is one of the arguments that you've got to be a bit careful. But certainly when I was in general practice and I would get patients who had had mammograms, I'd always say, look, it looks like it's okay, but they're not 100%, and anyway, you may develop something new. So even though you've just been reassured, then come and see me if you've got a problem.
Okay, more questions, points? Oh, look, okay.
The gentleman.
So, yes, gentleman
next.
there.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's really interesting. Your stance seems to be about your chances of getting cancer. What also interests me is that you're quite fatalistic about it. Being mid-50s, being female, increases your chances. Obviously, if you're overweight, obese, that. But other than that, it sounds like it's just a look at the draw and look at the draw. Of course, when you see these super fit people like Cyril Regis dying last year, or recently Michael Johnson had a stroke, you think these are really fit people. Why? So maybe that ties into you. And then you've said something else, which can sound like a silly question, but cancer research, the Institute of Cancer Research, so much money being pumped into it, all this fundraising, but with all the brains and minds and years being put in, we haven't got a cure for cancer. So really, is it worth it?
So is it worth researching?
What is it achieving? All these millions being pumped into cancer research, and it's been done in this country, presumably all over the world, and we haven't got a cure for cancer, so why keep going?
Well, I can tell you, if there hadn't been cancer research over the last 30 years, I wouldn't be here, because although my cancer was very early, it was extremely aggressive. And if you look at a book that's 20 years old, the kind of breast cancer I had was the worst possible kind, and it said, you're almost certainly going to die of this because it's HER positive, a horrible cancer because it's got this growth factor on and it goes mad. Actually, they've made a magic bullet against that particular horrible cancer. So, in fact, I wouldn't say it's one of the best ones to have, but the prognosis of that fairly rare cancer has been totally transformed. I agree with you, though. It does seem that there's an awful lot of money being put into research, and yet still many people with breast cancer and most people with a lot of other cancers, brain cancer, for example, their prognosis hasn't changed that much. But what I would encourage you to do is get a hold of a book by Sid Mukherjee called Siddhartha Mukherjee's cancer book, The Emperor of All Maladies. It won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago, and it is an absolutely superb history of cancer research. It's just a brilliant, brilliant science book. Sid Mukherjee, The Emperor of All Maladies. And it does give you hope, actually, that, yes, that we are on the edge of some very dramatic and interesting, genetically underpinned science that could transform the prognosis of many different kinds of cancer. So I'm relatively hopeful there.
I would say there are thousands of different types of cancer.
Yeah.
Breast cancer isn't just breast cancer. There are 4 different cells it comes from with 3 different receptors. Things change, and that's just breast cancer alone. And a lot of cancer research, you've got the guys doing PhDs in like the ICR in London at the basic level, then you've got all the pharma companies who are working hard, but they could put hundreds of thousands of pounds and it can take 10 years to get a drug that is ready to be tested. And then you need a trial that can take 5 or 10 years to come and see. It's a lot of time and a lot of money to do it, and we are getting there. The new immunotherapy drugs on the market, the CAR-T for lung cancer, for melanoma, they are going to be game changers at looking at how we are helping the body fight cancer rather than fighting the cancer itself. As we learn more, there's more research that needs doing, and I think it is worth putting the money in, but whether on a global scale we can get people to put their heads together and get drug companies to work together, rather than thinking, if I get this drug, I'll make millions. Can we all work together to fight cancer rather than making money?
Yeah,
because it is a business out there for people making drugs and treatments.
Can I follow on there? Because I think it's a really important point about just how expensive it is to develop an anti-cancer drug. In these days of personalised medicine, you've got two genomes if you've got cancer. You've got your own genome, and then you've got the genome of your cancer, because that's been mutated. And very often, that mutated cancer is producing a protein, let's say. The problem is that every mutated cancer is producing a different protein. Well, not quite every one, but there's an awful lot. There are, I think, 5,000 different cancer proteins just for head and neck cancers, or something like that. I mean, so hang on a minute. How is it going to work if you're a drug company and you want to, and you are there to make a profit? And I work at the University of Oxford with a chap called Chas Boutra, who has set up something called the Target Drug Institute, along with others. It's not just his. And the Target Drug Institute is an institute for targeting particular molecules with drugs. And what Chas is doing is he's trying to develop a model of science, which is what he calls pre-competitive. So he says when you're at the stage of playing around with these different proteins and different molecules, we need all hands on deck. It should be like the Human Genome Project. It should be open sourced, put your data on the internet, and nobody's hiding it. Nobody's saying this is commercial in confidence. Once you get a molecule that you can run with, then you take it away, and then you do your pre-phase 1 and your phase 1, 2, 3, 4. But the early stage of developing new drugs for cancer, as Liz said, should be a collaborative international endeavour, just like things like the Human Genome Project. And that's probably someone here who knows more about it than me.
Yeah, no, Professor Turnbull is. Can you get the microphone back? He actually works for the 100,000 Genomes Project, so I was hoping you might be able to
I may be preempting something you're going to say, but cancer is just such an amazing exemplar of Mother Nature being fantastically clever and devious.
Yes.
So all of these drugs, fantastic targeted therapy, you understand the mutated oncogene, you target it, you subvert it, you switch it down, the cancer goes away. It only takes one clever cell, it's a selective pressure. That cell just needs one cell to develop a resistance mutation. That cell has a selective advantage, it proliferates preferentially, and then a new resistant clone of the cancer emerges, and that would just happen serially.
And it happens a lot.
We are fighting.
It happens a lot. They just suddenly stop working. It's a different profile. We don't know
almost,
why.
in fact, almost with the exception of hematological malignancies, in solid tumours, we need to get people to a surgeon in order to cut out the cancer early enough, and then other drugs help, but it is a real battle to be cleverer than the ruthlessly Darwinian advantage that the cancer has.
And it is just the same as a bug developing resistance to antibiotics. The cancer develops resistance to the anti-cancer drugs. This actually, it's worth thinking how this affects the individual patient. I had a friend who had advanced prostate cancer, and when I was taking the Herceptin for my breast cancer, he was actually on a similar drug for his prostate cancer. But unlike me, who had an early stage, he had stage 4 when he was diagnosed. So it was all sort of riddled in the bones and all the rest of it. And he carried on for 4 or 5 years taking this drug that was a magic bullet for the particular genotype of his cancer. And he said, it's an extraordinary thing that I can live almost a completely normal life, full-time, working as a professor, all that kind of thing. And then one day, one cell is going to break free and I'm going to be dead within a month. And that's exactly what happened. But from his lived experience, he even more, you said, Liz, you take one day at a time, you appreciate what you've got, all that kind of thing. He really did live life to the full every day, and then he knew that when the mutation happened, that was going to be it, and it was.
I want to get so we'll see. Okay, so there was a hand down here at the front, and then I'll come over here.
Hi, I just wanted to go back to screening, which you seem to be overwhelmingly in favour of. But of course, you can get false negatives. But equally, you can get false positives. And a lot of the arguments, particularly around mammography, have been, that you're creating a big population of people who may actually be treated
That's something they're not going to die.
But the other question I wanted to ask, which is different tack entirely, was on state-sponsored or state-instituted legislation around foodstuffs or around binge drinking and so forth. And often, the Scottish Government are perhaps the best example of wading in on these things and making very extravagant claims for, state-sponsored limitation of sugar in foods or, the pricing of alcohol and so forth. I wondered if, in your appreciation of some of the risks in relation to cancer, you would comment on whether you think that kind of claim about risk and claim for state intervention is justified?
Okay, good question.
Now you asked two questions, and I was interested in both, and of course I've classically forgotten the first one.
Well, the first one was about
it's about screening.
Positives
Do you know, when I was a GP, I had patients going for mammograms all the time, but also, with cervical screening, I used to take smears and all that kind of thing, and it was absolutely my bread and butter for years and years and years. And I think there's an important aspect of managing expectations that when you take the test, when you, the doctor, or you, the radiographer, there is an opportunity for a conversation that says, look, first of all, it's not 100%, but if it wasn't pretty good, we wouldn't be using it at all. But then, if you get the letter that recalls you, that doesn't mean you've got cancer. What it means is you need some further checks. And I rather suspect that the people who are completely freaked out, and you read women's magazines in the dentist waiting room, and you think this woman who's told, I was told I had cancer, but then I didn't have it, and had obviously been quite traumatised. There was a missed opportunity to have a sensible conversation with that person to explain what the screening test meant. And of course, in screening, it's very important to not have false negatives, in order to have something that's very sensitive, that picks up quite a lot, and then you have a second test which is perhaps more expensive, maybe a bit more invasive, which can then distinguish more accurately the ones who really do have cancer from the ones who don't. And that's what the National Screening Committee is all about. Now I've forgotten your second question.
Can I just difference between food and get to food? So, breast screening relies on two consultant radiologists reading a mammogram. It's not looking at cells underneath a microscope saying yes or no. It's two human eyes looking at a digital mammogram. So it is never going to be 100% perfect. Plus, women can have dense breasts, which makes them white, and breast cancers are white, so they're hard to see. We also know with screening that you can pick up pre-cancer, called DCIS, and the problem is that may never become a cancer and it may never kill you. But what do you do if I tell you you have it? And as a woman, if I say, you've got cells that may become cancer in the future thanks to your screening mammogram, I can give you an operation which has complications of something you may never die of, or do you want a yearly mammogram every year and another biopsy just to wait for it to become cancer? We are now doing studies looking at watching and waiting for people with low-grade DCIS. Yeah. Screening isn't perfect, but it's the best we have. But let's talk about state-funded banning alcohol and sugar and junk food.
Keep going.
I think It's a good idea, but the government is scared because of how the public will react, and it's very, very hard to go there, especially as there's so much money behind advertising for these products. In an ideal world, everyone would live a healthy diet, but we don't live in an ideal world, and it's how do you stop kids going to McDonald's and buying sweets on the way home and the 40-year-olds drinking alcohol? I don't know what the answer is. I don't think people have the willpower anymore. They follow what their parents do. Most people don't live healthy lives. I don't know whether it's a good idea or not. What do you think?
See, I'm very surprised that you say that, because
I think it
what
is, but
what you were saying earlier about actually most of these risks are relatively small compared to the big risks of being female and over 50 and so on, and that life consists of more than just kind of the optimum physical health. I would have expected you to say, no, the state should not be putting its efforts into that, it should be putting its efforts into, I don't know, making sure that everybody has a decent income so they're not really stressed to working 3 jobs or living in houses that are damp, and there's big things.
I've done bariatric surgery on the overweight who are morbidly obese, going to die before they're 40, and with bariatric surgery we could stop the diabetes and make them live longer. I've operated on a 12-year-old girl who was 5 foot and weighed 100 kilos. This is normal in Luton. And I'm not talking about cancer, I'm talking about the general health of the population, and the heart disease, the diabetes, the strokes. And it's like supermarkets are just full of all that crap food that you buy and you eat and you binge drink. It's so easy. It's boring to eat healthily. No one's got the time to pick a healthy meal.
And there's, the question of whether individual choice is the only way to go in relation to, if you like, lifestyle habits it's a very complex area of public health ethics. And I think one of the people whose work I draw on in my own research is Amartya Sen, who won, I think, the Nobel Prize for Economics. And he uses something called the health capabilities model, because obesity in particular, but the obesity-related diseases, are strongly, strongly patterned by socioeconomic status. If you are poor, if you are socially excluded, etc., you are much, much more likely to get diabetes, heart disease, etc., high blood pressure, all that. Now, what Amartya Sen says, and he draws on the work of other people, is that you've got 2 things to factor into whether or not you're going to, get one of these obesity-related diseases. One is your choices, and one is your chances. And chances and choices are kind of reciprocally interacting, of course, because if that's what nudge is all about. You can choose to buy that Mars bar or not. But then there's also the fact that it is there by the checkout when you're going through the supermarket, etc. I paid for petrol the other day, and all the junk that is there, And of course, it's partly my choice, but it's also chances. So let's talk about chances. Boyd Swinburne, who's a New Zealand epidemiologist, has coined the phrase the obesogenic environment. And he says, from a population perspective, if there is lots and lots of junk food around, not much in the way of,
cheap,
fruit, veg, exactly, all that kind of thing. Yes, the junk food is really cheap, all that. The people who are going to be most damaged by it, I know that sounds like an early state, but bad luck, are going to be the poor, the people who have uncertain citizenship status, all that kind of thing. Now, if you factor all that in, I think it's okay for government to legislate around things like advertising before the 9 o'clock watershed. There's kind of choice architecture, they call it, don't they? Should we really have all those bars of chocolate right by the checkouts, all that kind of thing? And food labelling, of course, but also, basic food quality. We were never healthier than we were during the last war when there was rationing.
I was going to say, when you had to buy everything from the high street shops. You go to the butchers, you go to the greengrocers, you go to the bakers.
But hang on. Life expectancy has been going up every year until I think this last year.
Yeah, it's going down now. So.
we are living longer and healthier lives than ever before. The rationing was brought in because a lot of people didn't have enough. So,
well, I think some people still don't have
kind of
enough.
Bumped up.
I think some people still don't have enough.
People didn't have enough. I'm finding this very, very bizarre because we started off this session with how to feel empowered and take control.
Yeah.
And you've now both come full doctor on me and going, no, you people coming into my surgery, overweight and smoking and binge drinking, we're going to change your choice architecture. We're going to save you from yourselves. You don't know what's good for you, we do. And we're going to empower the government to nanny state you. Do you not feel any contradiction between that and the inspiring things you said at the beginning about when disease hits you, which isn't your fault, you feel you need to take back control of your life? Surely, just being able to choose whether to buy a bar of chocolate is a very small locus of control. Do you really want to take even that away?
We're not saying we're going to ban chocolate. That's not what I said at all.
She said with an air of reluctance.
I want people to be able to...
You offered me chocolate before we started.
She did, I know. I'm wondering if you're judging me now.
I want people to be able to make their own choices based on sensible information. And I don't want to come down and say you have to do this, you have to do that. Life is hard. It's even harder when you've had cancer. But I think it's giving me information that the public know what's healthy and what isn't, and giving them options so they can eat healthy if they want to. I finished chemo and I was going to go on kale juicing, really healthy vegetarian lifestyle. I thought, I can eat. I just want to eat cake and alcohol and crisps because I can and they taste good.
Yeah, well, that's my approach to life. Now, look, I'm really sorry about this. This has been sloppy chairing on my part. We have literally 3 minutes left. I know Claire wants to come back in. There are 2 people here that want to speak and haven't spoken yet.
We can answer quickly.
So can we take both your points or questions over there? Please keep them concise, and then I'll get you to sum up everything, and then you'll go and sign books. It's going to cost you individually. Carry on, fire away.
Hello. The research of Professor Jane Plant shows that breast cancer is nearly always diet-related. It's only a big problem in society is that eat a lot of dairy products. For example, the rates of breast cancer are 9 times higher for women in the USA than in rural China. And it's not environmental because when Chinese women adopt a Western diet, they start getting Western rates of breast cancer. And the same is true of prostate cancer. Are you familiar with their work?
Okay, so dairy is bad for. Oh, there's another book. I don't know if
dairy
it's signing
and the China study,
Dairy and your point or question or whatever it is.
Sort of question. About 12 years ago, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's fine now. But she, in terms of taking control, as it says on your book, she went to her GP, said there's something wrong. The GP sent her home, said there's nothing wrong with you, you're fine. She went elsewhere, said there's something wrong, please. They wouldn't even test her. Kept going places. No one would test her. Ultimately, she kept going back to the original GP, and eventually she was referred somewhere. But if she didn't push, if she just believed them, took their medical advice and went home, turns out she had one of the most aggressive types of breast cancer. She'd be dead. Is this still a problem? That was 12 years ago. Why was it a problem?
Can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a specific case it's kind of impossible to comment on.
Well, there is, I think we do have an obligation to comment, and I'm really sorry about what happened to your mother. And I wish I could say that would never happen again. It sounds horrific, and well done her for being persistent. Doctors do make mistakes, and
especially with young women.
Going back, But there is also an issue, and I obviously can't comment on the clinical aspects of the individual case, but that cancer symptoms evolve just like all other symptoms. And so when someone has a symptom and goes to the GP, and the GP says, oh, no, don't worry, nothing wrong, actually, the GP may, in some cases, say, look, come back in a month if you're not better, or something like that, but the person doesn't hear that. Or the GP assumes they'll come back, but the person thinks they've been packed off forever. So the idea of going back again to the GP and saying, look, it's got worse, because the thing about cancer symptoms is that they are progressive. They're unremitting and they're progressive. Whereas if you have, say, a breast lump that kind of gets better and you haven't found it and then it comes back again before your period, it gets better after, that's not the same thing as something that carries on. So yeah, GPs are supposed to follow nice guidelines, which are supposed to, refer this, and this type of person, and don't refer this, and this. And some of them do, and some of them don't. But yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that, and I'm really pleased that she's still around.
We are quick time, so if I could just get you to
just give a dairy
minutes summing up.
There's no evidence that dairy causes breast cancer.
There's a whole book about it.
Well, there's,
I know there's a book about it, but there's no evidence.
The overwhelming evidence is now that actually dairy may be protective for breast cancer. I know you're referring to the China study, but we have written about this.
Yeah, it's in the book. We've got a whole section about that in the book.
Read it in the book. Is there anything you'd like to say in 30 seconds to sum up? Or no? Please, before... I'm going to take that as a no. Before you thank Tricia and Liz, at 5:15, not only they, but also Lionel Shrubber and John Lloyd will be signing the books at the market shop on the mezzanine level, and you can also look around the ideas market in the foyer. Please do go. Honestly, it's a great book, and to say, even though I don't need it, I ended up reading it cover to cover because it's very engaging, fascinating, riveting. Thank you both so much. Please, thank you.